The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting this afternoon about the recent protests in Iran. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, is calling for support of those protests, but others there at the UN are calling the meeting itself an overreach by the U.S. Correspondent Benjamin Hall reports.
9 days in, and anti-government protests continue, despite attempts by the regime to overshadow them. For 3 days, Iran has held counter-rallies, showing tens of thousands of people supporting the government. It's thought many are bussed in. And at Friday prayers, to chants of death to America and Israel, leading hardline cleric Ahmed Khatami again blamed the U.S.
Those who got involved in the protests and still insist on their positions, they are Americans. Show no mercy to Americans.
At the emergency UN Security Council meeting, Nikki Haley again stood by the protesters.
And let there be no doubt whatsoever, the United States stands unapologetically with those in Iran who seek freedom for themselves, prosperity for their families, and dignity for their nation.
The U.S. has also imposed new sanctions on 5 Iranian companies linked to the country's ballistic missile program, though some have called for more.
Severe financial sanctions, including denying access to international banking system, must be imposed on the regime.
The protests are now the most serious internal crisis the regime has faced in almost a decade. 21 people are dead and many hundreds arrested. The opposition have long complained the regime prioritizes weapons over its people.
Any funding that comes to their hand, example the nuclear deal, is not going to spend on people who are starving on the streets.
This is a new wave of protesters, poor and mainly under 25, angry at the regime's corruption. Crucially, they come from the regime's traditional rural strongholds. Many look abroad for support.
Today, the world stands in support of the Iranian people, particularly Western democracies, the United States of America included. That will send a very clear message that we are no longer going to fall into the same trappings that this regime has set for all of us all these years.
It's hard to know what happens next, whether the protests continue or if they peter out. But many feel that something major has shifted, and either way, the Iranian regime is starting to crack. Brett?
Benjamin Hall in London. Benjamin, thank you.